Hello, good people of the internet. Welcome to part 2 of Beyond Politics, a 4-part series by myself, Chetan Narang, and my friend Rocco Jarman from Eyes Wide Open Life. Part 1 of this series was a discussion around the topic of why we need this game changing change in politics at all. If you are not familiar with part 1 of this series, I would highly recommend going through that video first before diving into this one. If you have watched the part 1 already, it would be a good idea to actually loop through the video to see what it featured. However, today's conversation also features in the initial parts a little recap of what that conversation was about. So you're good from that standpoint as well. Today's conversation is around how we come to find ourselves in this mess of a situation we find ourselves in as a society, the polarized situation we see in our society right now. Quite honestly, today's explanation, like most of this 4-part series, honestly, transcends politics. And it actually applies to all areas of human enterprise where we interact, where we coordinate, or we try to coordinate. Our politics, of course, our businesses, our jobs, our relationships, our friendships, our marriages, our religions, our communities, our societies, and all the rest of it. This message, this explanation transcends and applies to all of them. And what you're about to watch, quite honestly, is fundamentally important to the real growth that we want for ourselves, for our families, for our loved ones, and also for the ones who have not arrived yet. So, along those lines, I present to you part 2 of this 4-part series Beyond Politics, a conversation on how we find ourselves in this polarized situation we are in right now. Like this video if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and with an open mind and an open heart, let's get into it. So, Rocco, part 1 of this video was where we were talking about politics and specifically about the current scenario in Indian politics, American politics, let's just say global politics, where people have to choose one of the, let's just say, the lesser of two evils. That's true for almost everyone, even if people do not realize that they're still choosing an evil. They are. That's the situation right now. So, left, right, red, blue, that's the current situation. And in part 1 of this discussion, we actually established that that path of having to choose one of these two either leads to totalitarianism or it leads to more divide. And that's it. It can either lead to totalitarianism or disintegration. That is the only option we have. Plus, the fact that you're still choosing an evil would tell you that there is still some work left to be done. So it's not the solution. So we established that the solution would lie beyond this limited paradigm of binary. Yes, no, left, right, red, blue, etc. And of course, these definitions have gotten fuzzy since we invented them back in the day, the left and the right, the red and the blue, etc. But we still have roughly these two options available for almost
Mhm.
everyone across all democracies right now,
So there's
right?
two ways of looking at that real quick. So
Hmm.
the one is left and right. They've actually changed roles a little bit and morphed one into
Hmm.
the other. It's a bit strange, but
Hmm.
the easiest way
Hmm.
is recognizing that even in a company, in a family, in a group of friends, someone will be more conservative.
Hmm. Hmm.
Their mindset, their default would be to like keep it safe, keep it simple, keep it the way it was.
Hmm.
And the other side is probably more pioneering or progressive
Yeah.
or something.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So these dichotomies exist everywhere. Um, there'll be Hinduism is quite a permissive faith, the Vedic
Hmm.
tradition. But
Hmm.
even amongst that, there's people that have faith-based antagonism or argument.
Correct.
Um,
Correct.
you, you
Hmm.
know, there's nothing in this world, even Islam, that seems to be like, no, no, there's only our religion. Okay, well, now you've got two and a half versions
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
the only one. That automatically tells me that that's a challenge, and that
Hmm.
challenge is repeated again to a much more complicated degree in Judaism and Christianity.
Okay. Hmm.
125,000 schools or forms of Christianity. And aside from all the things that they agree on, those
Hmm.
couple of things that they disagree enough to call themselves this kind of Christian, and those fools over there are all wrong. So, and it's not like they're using those things to divide them. In America or in India, there's more things that unite people. What connects us is what we share. We share a country, we share a neighborhood, we share a common destiny or fate, because whatever, however we behave, we're all going to have the consequences for that. We share an atmosphere. We share the commons of the roads we walk on, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the environment we're living in, the sense of peace or prosperity or ambience is something everyone shares together. There's actually so many more things that are fundamental than are divisive, but for some reason here we are focusing on the divisive stuff. So I just wanted to make that clear that that's one of the ways in which we're separated. But what we're really talking about here is paradox. Anytime you arrive at a dichotomy or a paradox, what does it really mean? Why are people agreeing? Because two people are watching the same movie on the screen and taking a different narrative from the same movie. There's one reality playing out. There's one news story. There's one, but you get these completely, totally isolated, selective viewpoints. And those two viewpoints are not compatible because they arrive at different narratives. The one paints them as the baddie or the evil. These one paint they or them as the problem. And I've got a wonderful quote that I quite enjoy throwing into these moments, which is, we are all someone else's they.
That's exactly what was popping up in my head too. Yeah, correct.
Yeah, and just how ignorance of that is quite astounding, because the amount of times we say, well, there's also a different version of they, which I find so insane. Someone looks at something that is wrong, like something bad happened. A politician took money, or a government department didn't work, or somebody left a car on the side of the road, and someone will say, they really should clean that up. They know what needs doing, but there's never a version of that where it's them that needs to do the doing. It's always, no, they must do it. So we're all someone else's they.
Yes.
So true. It's not even antagonistic. Sometimes it's just a laziness. And, well, they did this and they did that. Who's the they? There's always some they.
Yeah. And that layers so well into the point I wanted to make, Rocco, where I wanted to also drive this. And that was, we talked about dichotomies. There is the left and the right in politics, and that is what everyone has to choose from right now.
Yes.
And then at some level, I think everyone feels somewhere deep down that this is not the answer. There's got to be something above this, which will actually solve the problems that we really want to solve. But then everyone is maybe looking for somebody else to solve that. So we need someone, they will solve it. They will solve it. Somebody will come. They must do it. And the ones who are actually acting out in the left and right and the red and the blue, etc., they are too invested in this game to actually step out of it. So it will have to be somebody else now. Right? It will have to be one of us.
Can you help me track a few ideas, because I might forget them? The one is, we need to just explain how paradox and dichotomies work. It's related to paradigm. And maybe let's just start with that.
Okay, I'm just noting it down here itself.
Yeah, sure. So we were saying that two different people can be watching the same movie and get a different take on the same thing. You can say that shouldn't happen, or you can assume that the other people are just bad faith or stupid, right? Because that's the assumption. The assumption is the people that don't agree with me are bad faith or ignorant. Right? But the irony is, there's other people on the other side that are arguing the other way and assume that your failure to agree with them is bad faith or ignorance. So you can either keep assuming in this prisoner's dilemma that you're the only one playing with a straight bat and everybody else is full of shit. That's a possibility. The other possibility is, like the elephant and the 5 blind sages, maybe everyone actually has a different piece of a puzzle that has relevance to their context. If you can make allowance for that, you have to make allowance that your side might be wrong as well. because
At
that's
least in some things they would be correct. Yes.
well, you have to start with that as a working hypothesis, because if you
Mm,
want
mm,
to
mm,
say, A, everyone's bad faith, which means this is going to end in war,
mm,
that's what it will do.
mm,
It'll end in conflict. Conflict comes when we don't value conversation.
mm,
And we don't think that there's a reason to have a conversation because the other person is not agreeing with me because I haven't made my point clear enough. They don't agree with me because it's in their interest not to agree with me, or they're just too
mm,
stupid.
mm,
So
mm,
let me
mm,
insult them, because that will work. Yeah.
mm, mm,
The other option, because I can tell you why that's stupid and why it's not going to work, but just try this idea on. That's what a working hypothesis is. You put an idea on like a hat, and then
mm,
you really commit to the look. You don't just commit to the look until you catch a glimpse of yourself in the mirror and get embarrassed and want to throw it off. You go, no, no, I'm going to own this hat. I'm going to wear it. And I'm going to see what the world looks like for a while whilst wearing this hat. If I wear
mm,
it for a few minutes or an hour and I'm not open-minded, I'm actually open-hearted, which means I'm putting down my vigilance and
mm,
I'm realizing that if I'm going to consider this working hypothesis to give whatever merit it has a chance, I can't be sitting like this inside waiting for the first mistake to go wrong. I've got to have some patience to try and bite it, chew it, digest it, and really see how I feel about it, see how it comes
mm,
out the other
mm,
side.
mm, mm, mm,
So the
mm,
working hypothesis is that not everybody is bad faith, or some people might be, but if you want to collaborate with anyone, you're going to collaborate with people who aren't bad faith. And if you know that you're not actually bad faith, there must be people like you on the other side. What
mm,
might you achieve if you both came from the pretext or the proposition of this working hypothesis, which says maybe our psychologies or our senses or our narrative or our framing is just making it so that we're watching a similar thing, but we're genuinely having differing experiences.
mm, mm, mm,
I'll give you an example. So you could take one young person who's been living in a war zone for a while, and then they leave and they grow up and all the rest of it. And you can take somebody else whose parents were being very sheltering of them in a very, very safe neighborhood, and you expose them to some violence at school or some violence on the TV, and you measure the psychological and nervous reaction from both. I guarantee you the one will be sensitized to it and the other one will be not. If you
mm,
ask them afterwards, who was the aggressor, or how scary was that person that was shouting, or how dangerous were they, the one that is unaccustomed to shouting and violence will give an elevated score, quick versus slow
yeah,
thinking. We're not
true.
dishonest. We sometimes just don't have a shared frame of reference.
Mm, mm,
And then based on who we identify with socially, we have a different frame of reference. So even though I'm white 50-year-old Australian living in blah. Maybe the way my heart and my psychology is wired, I associate more with people who are gay, regardless of what color their skin is or what country they come from. Or I am much more concerned about other Muslims, or I'm much more concerned about other vegetarians. Like I've
mm,
chosen my ideological tribe, and I've elevated the importance of an injury or an insult to that over what somebody else might have. And we can all stack
correct.
these differently. Yeah.
Mm, yeah,
So
yeah,
the working
true.
hypothesis says that this might be a more likely reason why people are unable or unlikely to agree. Can I start from that place?
Mm, 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 mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So you can only play the game with Chetan and I if you can do that. If
Mm,
you want to sit and say, oh, that sounds like whataboutism. No, we're not talking about the incentive of the people who are doing something right or wrong. We are talking about ourselves, the decision makers, as observers to determine whether something is right or wrong. So this is
mm,
all about self. It's not solving a problem out in the world. It's solving the lens or the filter that you have that you begin with today. And not just unlearning the attachment, is attaching to a psychological and an emotional sense of meaning and purpose to unlearning that. In other words,
mm, mm,
not just doing it because it's clever, but doing it because if there's any option of people collaborating, it's going to be via that avenue, because the
mm,
only other option to that is apathy or
mm,
conflict. So those are your choices. It's self-ownership in our camp. Let's play the game, or apathy,
mm,
some
mm,
combination of apathy and conflict.
mm,
So we begin with that working hypothesis, and then we say, well, okay, what's the reason? How do we, because we can play with this idea,
mm,
excuse me, but one of the projects is going to be, but why, why was it happening in the first place? Because if I can explain that, then some of the people can come along for the ride.
mm,
Another part of the conversation, and I'd like you to help me remember these. So the one
mm,
conversation was, um, what's the why
mm,
of it, the how of it, what's the science and the psychology and the mechanics, what's an analogy or a metaphor for it? How can we explain that 8 billion people are captured in the same illusion? Give me the
mm,
explanation there. And then the other question is, what might we do from here? And that's
mm,
a tree, really, a tree with many branches, many ideas, and
mm,
everyone can start think tanking this. Now we're going to have an informal think tank between Chetan and I. That's what we're doing here on the Unlearning Playground. We're
mm,
talking about this apocalypse phase of humanity where the veil's being lifted about what we're actually participating in, and then everybody gets to play with to say, how do we think this might have happened?
mm,
Project one. Or project two, with its many beautiful branches, is what can we fix? What can we improve? How can we reduce friction? How can we reduce misunderstanding? How can we
mm,
reduce that pandemic of lack of self-awareness? How can we reduce
mm,
tribalism and vigilance? And as you
mm,
said, in your upcoming trailer, excuse me, it's about compassion and consciousness and self-awareness.
mm,
But as much compassion to yourself. So now, Chetan, I invite you. I think let's not talk about the what might we do from here. Let's
mm,
first talk about how it is
mm. Okay.
that human beings can be living right next door to each other, have gone to the same school, eat at the same restaurants, and then have these two completely different worldviews. What you need to envision, and I've actually got a diagram somewhere, but we can just talk about it briefly, is imagine a pyramid.
Mm,
And the distribution of the pyramid is there's maybe 5 or 6 tiers, and there's a kind of golden ratio: 1,
mm,
1, 3, 5, 8,
mm.
11. That Fibonacci sequence.
Entrepreneurs. Yeah.
So there's that kind of scale when you stack the pyramid and you say how many people at the bottom versus how many in the smallest in the next, and how many people in the next. So imagine you've got a pyramid, and the volume of that pyramid represents the whole of human population alive at the moment.
Mm,
Everyone
mm,
that is conscious and participating in what we call the human experiment, or the human experience right now.
mm, mm,
But the tiers are separated out by consciousness. The ones at the top of the peak have the most consciousness.
mm,
So more consciousness per capita. The consciousness is concentrated in the peak. It's slightly less concentrated
mm,
according to that mathematical ratio. So it's not that some people are better or worse. It's just that in any sample set, you should be able to arrange people in that pattern, because you'll find there's a normalized curve for everything, for people's height, for
mm,
whatever we have capacities for. There'll be an average, and the average will take up the bulk, and then the exceptions will be
mm,
fewer and fewer towards the extremes, right?
mm.
Right.
Okay. Mm,
So if you take any human population
mm,
in India or in America or on the left or on the right, and you divide them up, they should be able to map onto that pyramid somehow. So
mm,
what we're saying is the bottom tier has the most people, but the lowest consciousness per capita,
mm,
right? The
mm,
people at the top have the most, are the fewest, but have the highest consciousness per capita.
And
That
Rocco, for the purpose of explaining, can you also explain what you mean when you say higher consciousness and low consciousness or less consciousness?
Well, if the aim is consciousness, self-awareness, and compassion, the capacity to exercise those three beyond your animalistic nature or beyond your defaults that you arrive with. Let's
So, to put a simple example, let's say a person's degree of self-awareness or consciousness would be, in some sense, the ability to detach from their own situation and look at it from a third-party perspective. That's one aspect of.
objectivity. One object is discernment, to be able to tell between minor things based on some nuance.
The ability to hold paradoxes, maybe.
Exactly, because that is a form of discomfort where the mind and the sensibility have to override the nervous system. And so the human is emerging further away from the animal that we are, so to speak.
Yes.
So that would be consciousness,
Okay.
right? Another way of describing consciousness is people who are motivated by love, not fear.
I love that, man. I love
Right. Now, here's the nice thing about the pyramid is consciousness peaks towards the top, but love over fear peaks towards the center.
Oh, you mean in terms of volume? In terms of
So the whole
volume?
pyramid, right? At the top is more consciousness per person, at the bottom is less, but each tier has the same amount of consciousness. But this one is divided by 7.5 billion people and less and less and less. But in each tier, you get an extreme left and an extreme right, ultraviolet, infrared, positive and negative, male and female. Any form of polarity has to have two poles. But in the center is love over fear, the dualism, the view of transcendence, the idea that something above can make sense of the seeming division beside me, you know? So if you can imagine the middle of the pyramid is light, like the color of your lamp, that light's playing onto the wall. And as you edge left and right, it's infrared and ultraviolet. So the colors of the pyramid refract towards red and towards blue, left and right. And on the left, there is blue polarization, and on the right, there's red polarization. And so that means if you're sitting in a low rung with low consciousness, and you are polarized left or polarized right, you can look at the same reality that's happening in front of you, and you can perceive. If you take lenses of glasses and you turn the molecules like this, it means only light that comes in at that angle will come through. That's what it means to have polarized lenses. So everyone's got the experience of looking at their phone with polarized lenses and having to go like this, because you can't see your screen until you take your glasses off, and then you can see the reality of what's on your screen. Now, imagine we have psychological filters built in that orientate our psyche and our nervous system and our default story to polarization. So we all pick up the same signal of reality, but what we can process is limited to our consciousness and our integrated language and self-awareness. So that our ability to demodulate that signal and make sense of it and decode it accurately is our consciousness, our awareness. And we can have too much noise and distortion because we're not still enough. We can not have integrated better language, so we can't demodulate what we're seeing because we haven't got contexts for that scenario. We can't understand that there's nuance in it. Or we're polarized endemically in ourselves. So our perception of that same truth, your radio station right next to mine, you're polarizing the signal one way, I'm polarizing it the other way. I'm accounting to my heart and my brain what I think the truth is that's just happened, and you're doing a different one, and you're getting a different take. That is how human beings are. Now, that's going to happen in a marriage because I'm more masculine, my wife's more feminine. I'm an older person of 50 years old. My daughter is 3 years old. Her paradigm that she sees the world in is very different to my paradigm. I think she's making a loud noise. She's having the best fun of her life. I think that's too much ice cream. She's crying because her heart is broken because she really believed she wanted more and she was enjoying it. And she doesn't
Mm,
understand why it shouldn't be. So
mm,
my neighbor, he's married an American woman. I've married into an Irish family. So we can hear the same piece of news and it means something completely different to us over here.
mm, mm,
Now,
mm,
if this can happen between two neighbors across every other spectrum that we can talk about, how do we think it's not happening politically?
mm,
And
mm,
now that we've tried this working hypothesis on, doesn't this just perfectly explain every single argument? Now, people have a natural propensity to argue this way, and then the newspapers and social media companies selectively choose headlines that and influencers and radio stations or news channels or whatever, anybody who is producing content is producing it to get more watches and likes and interactions. And I don't care if that's happiness, support, rage,
mm.
disappointment, anger, any emotion will do. And the easiest one to game is outrage, vigilance, fear.
Mm.
So they keep us in a fear state, not because they are trying to control us, but because they are playing the attention game. And
Mm.
we don't realize that we're being played. And they don't realize because their consciousness and their discernment is not enough, the power that they're wielding and the harm that they're doing, not just to others, but ultimately then to themselves.
Exactly, Rocco. Exactly. I
The
always like to
short-term thinking,
also
yeah.
I always like to also include here that a lot of people, when they are told that they are playing a game, like someone else is playing a game on them, they suddenly feel as if they are the puppets and these guys are the masters. But like your Truman Show example, where it's recursive, these people do not realize that they are playing the game on themselves too. They are also a part of the game,
A
right?
game, yes,
A game, yes, and
yes.
it's fear driven. If your fears are being gamed, these people who are gaming your fears are also being gamed from their fear because no one
In
else would
some
do
other
that.
way, exactly right. So they're
Yeah.
just chasing a viable business model because
Mm,
their background means that the most important thing in the world is to not be vulnerable to society. You've got to make your own
mm,
way. And
mm,
because I had such a rough upbringing and I've seen so much suffering and violence, I don't care. People are just objects to me that are in
mm,
my
mm,
way. I'm
mm,
just going to do
mm.
whatever I can. That's their mentality.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's a very narcissistic mentality, but they don't
correct.
know
Mm,
that they are the parasite and we are the the host.
mm,
And we
correct,
don't know
correct.
that we're a host.
Yes.
And
Mm,
we don't know that when we comment on social media, we part of us forms a service for the parasite by
correct, correct. We're just
generating
feeding into it.
more outrage and fear and
Mm,
anger. And even I've read some of your comments on Instagram. Some people
mm,
are very clear
mm,
arguments or clear challenges. They're wonderful. And it's
mm,
worthy discussions to have.
mm, mm,
But there is a concept that I'd like to talk about called supervenience.
mm,
So if I take this book that I wrote,
mm,
I can analyze this at the level of the language it was written in and the concepts it talks about. And I could even get something like ChatGPT to extrapolate the essence of this,
mm, mm,
somebody
mm,
might do a review. But if I
mm.
get physicists or scientists or accountants or anyone who drives into more accurate fact and minutia and detail and what about this and this is how many molecules or letters there were or pages or the glue that this was made from and they can tell you the
The
chemical
co-
compound,
mm.
more information and detail
Is not
isn't
really
better.
utilitarian. Yeah.
No, what's better
And
is what has context.
mm, mm, mm,
Now we've got a challenge because I can argue my facts that are totally true. Then the chemist is going to argue a different set of facts that are also totally true. But the amount of facts that we all need to now try and correlate is what's causing overwhelm.
absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
everyone's generating more overwhelm in their bickering about their lack of consensus of
Correct.
what So overwhelm generates overwhelm, and that tendency in nature, in physics, in the cosmos is called chaos. It's a trend towards a level of disorganization or incoherence where consciousness cannot operate. Consciousness can only operate in a degree of synergy and a degree of harmony. That's how the universe is made. It's not me. This is not a spiritual proclamation. This is physics. And consciousness, from our living perspective, even though consciousness is potentially universal and eternal, which I believe it is, just from our perspective, this ability that we tap into as we evolve as humans throughout our lives and then as a species, is this ability to share a story, to conceive of something, to imagine, to be aware, to be sentient, to cognate and know that you're cognating. And right, that capacity is predicated on life. And life that has been sustained for a long arc of development. That means that if that consciousness wants anything, there's nothing to say that the level that we've reached where we are today is the end of that road. We're just the end of the beginning of a curve. We haven't even taken off yet as a species. So that capacity for consciousness, that potential that emerges, the more we emerge, that's dependent on life, and life is dependent on harmony and sustainability and mutual actualization. It's all about emergence again.
So then, Rocco, what you're hinting towards is that if we keep ourselves polarized, no matter what stage of the pyramid we are in, no matter what level of the pyramid we are in, if we keep ourselves polarized, we are only feeding into the chaos, which is only going to limit life as we know it, life with a capital L, and also life that you inherit, life with a small l. So you're going to limit everything. So you have to let go of your polarity in one sense, for sure.
Well, that's the thing that's robbing you of the whole group transcending, because the whole group can only transcend together. Now, here's the problem. Tier 1 can only relate to tier 2. They can't relate to tier 3.
Relate in the sense?
Relate. Like I walk into a room and say, a bunch of toddlers, and I say, okay, listen here, what I want to do is make sure the doors are closed, everyone's safe, we know we're going to be out of here by 3 o'clock. No one gets the importance or relevance of that because they're toddlers. So now also you get somebody who lives a pretty rough life, let's say in Australia or America, but they've got a certain standard of sophistication. They only notice people below them that are less sophisticated than them, and they go, oh my God, look what trash these people are. And then there's someone above them that's looking at them and going, oh my God, look at what trash these are. But the people that we think are trash are looking down on other people that they think are trash. And everything is relative is what I'm saying, right?
But why do you say only one level?
Because there's a limit to the coherence. You need this much consciousness to care to be conversant on certain levels of complexity or certain levels of nuance.
So relatability in that sense too. So the people at the higher rung can only ever communicate what they are feeling, what they are experiencing with the one rung below them, but the ones below even the second rung maybe would not be able to comprehend what these guys are talking about.
Plus,
right?
Because the pyramid shapes downwards like that, there's more real estate in that tier that can lean into polarization. So the middle core is light, which means at the top, the whole thing is coherent. The next one is slightly less coherent. The next one is completely less. And so not only can you not get too far left or right, you can't go too far up or down either.
Agreed.
Right.
I understand that. I'm able to picture it now. Yeah.
Right. Now, that pyramid, that model, I'll do a video on that, right? And I'm going to need your help. But that is the explanation of the human condition now. That explains polarization. It explains the incoherence of message. Now you add to that entire pyramid is co-opted into different paradigms. So imagine we've got three kinds of paradigms. We've got business, we've got politics, and we've got religion. And those three are incoherent and incompatible. And then each of them are split into subdivisions that grew up themselves, one in Japan, one in Iran, one in South America, over millions or thousands of years. And some of them are ideological, and some of them are how they organize themselves civilly and socially. Of course, these are all going to be incompatible. You can't travel 50 kilometers if you in India, in the villages, where you don't get to a place where someone doesn't speak your language.
Correct. Yeah.
Now, you don't even have the same frame of reference. Okay. So now you just add that and you multiply it by 8 billion people, and we constitute the platform. There's only one platform, planet Earth, the environment, and the humans and the animals we share it with. That's the platform that these are running on. But then I've got the communist software and the Hindu software and the political software and the Hollywood software and the pop culture software. And I'm running all these paradigms, and I can't literally feel coherent in them. I can't track all of the stuff that's happening. I can't decide what's right or wrong, because all of these paradigms that I'm drawing from to interpret the world are themselves incoherent. I haven't done my own internal coherence. In other words, mindfulness, meditation, clearing my biases and my fallacies, becoming self-aware, learning about my emotions, my psychology, what makes me think and act and react and be triggered in certain ways. It's impossible. The project is impossible. So if you don't understand how and understand that model of the pyramid, what a wonderful question is to sit and ask yourself, where do I fit on that pyramid? How close am I to the center, and how close am I to the top? Now, my argument is that I don't think I'm at the top, but I believe, based on the way that I speak and the project that I carry in my heart and what I'm trying to happen, that there are other people, few, in different tiers, that are like me. And I feel like I'm close to the center of something, because I'm much more concerned about tomorrow and about meaning making out of our whole human history, and sharing ideas like this that are unifying and explanatory and cause so much peace to go, because there's no need for half of the war that we carry in our hearts, because half of the war is because of injustice, and half of that sense of injustice is believing that somebody else knew better, but they didn't care enough about us. But they just don't know better, and they don't even care for themselves. So when you realize that your problem that you're dealing with in your opposite, who the red tie or the blue tie, or whether it's gay or straight, or whatever side of any dichotomy you're sitting on, war does not ensue between bad people. War ensues between good people who forget the value of peace and forget the value of harmony and coherence.
And it takes two. It takes two to make that dance happen. So
it takes two.
I mean,
well, not
takes
only
both
that.
sides.
Yeah, go.
I mean, it takes both sides to make that dance happen, to make that war happen. We can
Yes, but that can be used as a reason to then wait for they to take the first step.
Oh yeah, that's the shadow side anyway. That's the shadow side anyway. I mean, when you were talking about logical fallacies, I was thinking, like we discussed previously, logical fallacies and cognitive biases can have a shadow side where you're using them to say that everything that the other side is saying is biased, is wrong.
Yeah.
While not considering it on your own arguments, on your own thinking, ever.
And if like some of those arguments that you are getting on your channel, it's not like they can't prove their facts and their details. It's that according to what we're trying to suggest, those facts and details are too granular and non-conclusive to really help with the project. So you can be right and still not help.
Exactly, and still not help.
This isn't about being right or wrong. This is about doing the better or the worst thing. And trying to argue for 10 years about who's right or wrong can't be better than finding middle ground and trying something and making compromise.
True.
It's just, this isn't ideological. This is pragmatic,
Mm.
mathematical. This is
Mm.
about resonance. This is about, so when physics or scientists or physicists look at something, things can't have violent reactions. They can't be uncontrollable. They can't be runaway processes or enormous amounts of complexity. Everything we do, we try and do it in an ordered way, in a harmonious way, because we don't even think we're doing that, but it would be insane not to, right?
Mm. Mm.
What
Mm.
makes
Mm.
us think that appealing to these ancient religions
Mm.
and sticking to them literally about life advice written by people who couldn't possibly have shared the context of the experience that we're busy having. Just
The complexity. Yeah.
it's just the sheer complexity of it and the
Mm.
nuance
Mm.
that you require.
Thank you for staying with us till here. This seemed like a good place to pause the conversation around the how that we started with. As a key takeaway, I would highly recommend to check out for yourself where you lie on the consciousness pyramid that Rocco talked about. Meditate on it. And more importantly, think about where you would want to lie. Think about where you would want your leaders to lie. And then take your next actions accordingly. We build further on this theme in the remainder of this series too. Part 3 will be around the discussion of what we can do as an individual and as a society to actually steer our path towards the growth that we really want. It comes out next week, that is if you're watching this real time. If you're watching this in the future, part 3 would have already also released and would be appearing on your screens probably, or appearing down below in the links in the description. Make sure you check it out. Make sure you like this video if you haven't already. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I hope to see you in the playground soon with the same open mind and open heart. Let's change the game together. Until next time, peace out.